What's your darkest family moment that no one talks about anymore? My dad made me choose between him and my pet rabbit when I was 8. I still remember the day I bought Coco with 3 months of saved allowance money. The pet store lady told me brown rabbits were the friendliest, and she was right. Coco would hop around my bedroom every morning, nudging my feet until I got up. He'd sit on my lap during cartoons, and even learn to come when I called his name. My friends thought it was weird having a rabbit instead of a dog, but Coco was perfect for me. He was quiet, gentle, and never bit anyone. I built him elaborate obstacle courses using cardboard boxes and taught him to navigate through tunnels. Mom would laugh watching us play together in the backyard, but my dad hated everything about Coco from day one. Rabbits are rodents, he'd say, whenever I brought up getting Coco a bigger cage or new toys. They're not real pets, they're just expensive rats that eat vegetables. He complained about the smell, even though I cleaned Coco's cage religiously every other day. He complained about the cost of rabbit food and bedding. He complained about the noise Coco made at night, though honestly rabbits are basically silent compared to dogs. The tension got worse every week. Dad would make snide comments about wasting money on that thing whenever I asked for rabbit supplies. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about Coco at dinner. Mom would try to keep the peace, but I could see she was getting tired of the constant arguments. Then came that Saturday morning. Mom had left early for grocery shopping and her book club meeting. I was eating cereal in the kitchen when Dad walked in, carrying Coco's travel carrier in one hand and his car keys jingling in the other. My stomach dropped immediately. Something about his expression told me this wasn't going to be good. "We're taking a drive," he said, setting the carrier on the counter with a thud that made Coco scramble inside. "Where are we going?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Dad stared at me for a long moment, then sat down across from me at the kitchen table. His voice was calm but serious. "I'm giving you a choice, son. Either that rabbit goes back today, or I'm packing my bags and moving out. You'll never see me again, and your mother will spend the rest of her life wondering why her husband left." I was 8 years old. I didn't understand divorce or recognize emotional manipulation. I just knew Dad was serious and my mom would be absolutely destroyed if he disappeared. The drive to the pet store felt like it took forever. Dad didn't say a single word. I sat in the back seat next to Coco's carrier, watching him huddle in the corner, probably confused about why we were in the car. When we pulled into the parking lot, Dad turned around and looked at me. "You're going to carry him inside yourself," he said. "You're going to hand him over to the employee and tell them you can't take care of him anymore." My hands were shaking as I lifted the carrier. Coco's little nose twitched through the bars and he made that soft chattering sound he always made when he was nervous. The pet store employee was a teenage girl who looked bored until she saw me crying. She asked if I was sure about giving up my rabbit and I nodded because my dad was standing right behind me watching every move. As the employee carried Coco toward the back room, he looked at me through the carrier bars one last time. Dad bought me a chocolate ice cream cone on the drive home like we'd just finished some normal father-son errand. When Mom got home with groceries, she asked where Coco was. "He escaped," Dad said quickly. "Probably a loose cage wire. The kid left the door open." Mom spent the whole afternoon searching the neighborhood, calling his name and asking neighbors. She cried herself to sleep that night. I never told her what really happened. That was 18 years ago, and I still wake up some nights thinking about that moment when Coco looked at me through those carrier bars. The confusion in his dark eyes, the way his little nose twitched like he was trying to understand why I was abandoning him. I've carried that guilt my entire life, and until recently I thought I'd take it to my grave. But things have a way of coming full circle, don't they? Let me back up a bit and explain how my family worked back then. My dad, Richard, was what you'd call a traditional patriarch. He worked construction, came home covered in dust and sweat, expected dinner on the table and the house quiet while he watched the news. He wasn't necessarily mean, but he had very clear ideas about how things should be. Men worked, women took care of the house, kids were seen and not heard, pets were an unnecessary expense and distraction. My mom, Linda, was the opposite. She was gentle, nurturing, always trying to smooth over conflicts. She worked part-time at a dentist's office, but considered her real job to be keeping the family happy. She loved animals, would stop to pet every dog we passed on walks, always wanted us to get a cat or dog but never pushed too hard when Dad said no. When I brought up wanting a pet for my 8th birthday, she was the one who convinced him to let me use my allowance money for something small and quiet. "A rabbit would be perfect," she'd said. "They're clean, quiet, don't need walks. It would teach him responsibility." Dad had grudgingly agreed, probably thinking I'd lose interest after a few weeks. But I didn't. If anything, having Coco made me more responsible than most adults. I researched rabbit care obsessively, saved every penny for the best food and toys, even taught myself to build furniture for his cage using YouTube videos and scraps from Dad's workshop. The morning after Coco was gone, I couldn't eat breakfast. Mom made pancakes, my favorite, but they tasted like cardboard. She kept asking if I wanted to make more lost pet flyers, if maybe we should check the animal shelters. Every question was like a knife twisting in my chest. Dad sat at the table reading his newspaper, occasionally making comments about how rabbits probably wouldn't survive long outside anyway. "Nature will take its course," he said, not looking up from the sports section. "Don't get your hopes up." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell Mom everything, but I was 8, and the threat still felt real. If I said anything, Dad would leave, Mom would be heartbroken, and it would be my fault. So I just sat there pushing pancakes around my plate, watching Mom cry over a rabbit she thought was lost when he was actually sitting in some pet store cage waiting for a new family. School became my escape. Mrs. Peterson, my 3rd grade teacher, noticed I was quieter than usual but didn't push. I threw myself into my studies, staying late for tutoring I didn't need, volunteering to clean the classroom, anything to avoid going home to that empty corner where Coco's cage used to be. My best friend Jake lived next door. He'd been excited about meeting Coco. His mom was allergic to most pets, so he'd been planning to come over after school to play with him. When I told him Coco had escaped, Jake immediately wanted to organize a neighborhood search party. We could make flyers, he said during lunch. My sister has a computer. We could put his picture on them and everything. I had to make excuses. My mom already looked everywhere. He's probably too scared to come out. Each lie made me feel sicker. Jake kept bringing it up for weeks. Any sign of Coco? Did you check the park again? My dad said rabbits like to hide in bushes. I started avoiding him, which meant I started avoiding the one person who might have helped me feel less alone. The worst part was how hard Mom took it. She blamed herself completely. I should have double-checked the cage latch, she'd say. I should have noticed something was loose. She bought special rabbit food and left it in the backyard, hoping Coco would smell it and come back. She called animal shelters daily for 2 weeks. She even put an ad in the local paper with a reward offer. Dad would pat her shoulder and say things like, "Don't beat yourself up, honey. These things happen." The casual comfort in his voice made me want to punch something. He was consoling her for a problem he'd created, playing the supportive husband while I knew the truth. But kids adapt, right? That's what everyone says. Kids are resilient. They bounce back. Except I didn't bounce back. I just learned to carry it. I became obsessed with not disappointing anyone. If Mom asked me to take out the trash, I'd do it immediately. Plus organize the recycling and sweep the porch. If Dad needed help in the garage, I'd hand him tools before he asked for them and clean up afterward without being told. I was desperate to prove I was worth keeping around, that I wouldn't cause any more problems that might make him leave. This hypervigilance extended to school. I had to get perfect grades. I had to be polite to every teacher. I couldn't get in trouble, couldn't be too loud, couldn't ask for anything that might cost money or cause stress at home. By the time I was 10, I was practically invisible. The good kid who never caused problems, never asked for anything, never spoke up. Jake's family got a dog that year, a golden retriever puppy named Buddy. I'd watch them play in the backyard from my bedroom window, remembering how Coco used to hop around the grass, how he'd stand on his hind legs to reach dandelions. Jake invited me over constantly, but being around Buddy made my chest tight. The joy on Jake's face when he played with his dog was exactly how I'd felt with Coco, and I couldn't handle the reminder of what I'd lost. Mom noticed my withdrawal but misunderstood it. "Maybe we should think about getting another pet," she suggested one evening while we were washing dishes. "It's been almost 2 years. I think you're ready." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Another pet meant another chance for Dad to make me choose. Another innocent animal that could become a weapon against me. I immediately started shaking my head. "No, I don't want another pet. I'm fine. I'm too busy with school anyway." Mom looked hurt. "Honey, I know you loved Coco, but..." I said no. My voice came out sharper than intended. Mom stepped back, surprised. I'd never spoken to her like that before. Dad looked up from his newspaper. "The boy's made his decision, Linda. Drop it." But I caught something in his expression. A small smile, like he was proud of me for refusing. Like I'd learned my lesson. That night, lying in bed, I realized something that terrified me. I was becoming like him, learning to cut off emotional attachments before they could hurt me. Learning that love was conditional, that everything I cared about could be taken away if I didn't behave correctly. Middle school was rough. I was that quiet kid who did well academically but had no close friends. I'd learned not to get too attached to anyone or anything. When other kids talked about their pets, their hobbies, their collections, I felt like I was watching them through glass. They seemed so confident that the things they loved would stay in their lives. I joined the chess club, partly because I was good at it, but mostly because it was individual. No team dependencies, no one else to worry about disappointing. I could control my own success or failure. The chess coach, Mr. Williams, was impressed with my strategic thinking. "You're always thinking 3 moves ahead," he told me after I won my first tournament. "That's rare for someone your age." If only he knew I'd been thinking 3 moves ahead since I was 8 years old, constantly calculating what might go wrong, what I might lose next, how to avoid giving anyone the power to hurt me again. High school brought new challenges. I was academically successful, got into advanced classes, started thinking about college, but I was also increasingly isolated. I'd mastered the art of being friendly without being close, helpful without being vulnerable. Teachers liked me, classmates respected me, but no one really knew me. Dating was particularly complicated. I was terrified of caring about someone enough that they could hurt me. I went to a few school dances, had some casual conversations with girls, but always kept things surface level. The one time a girl named Sarah asked me to be her boyfriend junior year, I panicked and made excuses until she gave up. Jake, meanwhile, had become popular, played on the soccer team, had girlfriends and parties and all the normal teenage experiences I couldn't bring myself to pursue. We still lived next door but had grown completely apart. Sometimes I'd see him in the hallway at school and remember when we used to build Lego cities together, when he was the person I told everything to. But that version of myself felt like someone else entirely. My relationship with Dad had evolved into something strange and distant. He treated me with a kind of gruff approval. I was the son who didn't cause problems, who got good grades, who helped around the house without complaint. But there was always an undercurrent of tension, like we both knew something unspoken existed between us but had agreed never to acknowledge it. Mom was the one who worried. "You're so serious all the time," she'd say. "Don't you want to hang out with friends? Go to parties? Do something fun?" I'd assure her I was fine, that I preferred studying, that I was focused on getting into a good college. All true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd learned not to want things too much because wanting led to losing, and losing led to that hollow ache in your chest that never quite goes away. Senior year, I applied to colleges far from home, not because I was eager to leave, but because distance felt safer. If I was hundreds of miles away, there would be fewer opportunities for anyone to take away things I cared about. I could build a life on my terms, with boundaries I controlled. I got accepted to a decent state school about 3 hours away, full scholarship based on academics. Mom cried when I told her, happy tears, but Dad just nodded approvingly. "Smart move," he said. "Get out there and make something of yourself. The summer before college, something happened that changed everything. I was working part-time at a local veterinary clinic, filing paperwork and cleaning kennels. It wasn't something I'd sought out. Mom had seen a help wanted sign and thought it would be good work experience. I'd been reluctant, but the pay was decent and it looked good on college applications. Reluctant, but the pay was decent and it looked good on college applications. Martinez, the head veterinarian, was a kind woman in her 50s who treated every animal like it was her own. She noticed I was good with scared animals, that I had a gentle way of handling them during examinations. You ever think about veterinary school? She asked one afternoon while we were treating an injured cat. I shook my head immediately. Too expensive, too much school. But she kept bringing it up. You have the temperament for it, and the intelligence. Have you looked into the financial aid options? I hadn't looked into anything, honestly. I'd been so focused on just getting through each day that I hadn't allowed myself to think about what I actually wanted to do with my life. Wanting felt dangerous, but working at the clinic was awakening something in me I'd buried for years. The satisfaction of helping scared animals. The joy of seeing them recover and go home to families who loved them. Every day I watched Dr. Martinez reunite pets with their owners, watched the relief and happiness on people's faces when they got their beloved companions back. It reminded me of everything I'd lost. One evening while cleaning the rabbit kennels, the clinic boarded small animals sometimes, I found myself face to face with a brown rabbit that looked startlingly like Coco. Same color, same size, same gentle way of approaching the cage bars when I knelt down. I sat there for a long time, just watching him eat his hay, remembering what it felt like to have something that was entirely mine, something that loved me unconditionally. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the full weight of what had been taken from me. That night, I made a decision that had been building for years without my conscious awareness. I was going to tell Mom the truth. I found her in the kitchen as usual, cleaning up after dinner. Dad was in the living room watching TV, just like always. The routine of our family hadn't changed much in 10 years. Mom, I said, my voice already shaking, I need to tell you something about Coco. She looked up from the dishes, immediately concerned. What about Coco, honey? The words stuck in my throat. For 10 years, I'd imagined this conversation, but now that the moment was here, I couldn't figure out how to start. How do you tell your mother that your father manipulated an 8-year-old into abandoning his beloved pet? How do you explain that you've been carrying this secret like a stone in your chest for a decade? He didn't escape, I finally managed. Dad made me take him back to the pet store. The dish she was washing slipped from her hands and clattered into the sink. She turned to face me fully, water dripping from her hands onto the floor. What do you mean he made you take him back? The whole story came pouring out. The ultimatum, the drive to the pet store, the way Coco looked at me through the carrier bars, Dad buying me ice cream afterward like nothing had happened, the lies we told her, everything. By the time I finished, Mom was crying. Not the gentle tears she'd shed when she thought Coco was lost, but deep shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. He made you choose, she whispered. He made an 8-year-old choose between his pet and his father. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She was quiet for a long time, just crying and staring at the floor. Then she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure fury. Where is your father? Before I could answer, she was marching toward the living room. I followed, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment our family would finally confront the truth that had been poisoning us for years. Dad was sitting in his recliner, remote in hand, watching some crime show. He looked up when Mom stormed in, initially annoyed at the interruption. Richard, Mom said, her voice trembling with rage. We need to talk. Something in her tone made him mute the TV and sit up straight. He looked between her and me, and I saw the moment he realized what was happening. Linda, whatever the boy told you, don't. Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Don't you dare try to minimize this. You made our 8-year-old son choose between his pet and his father. You manipulated a child. You made him lie to me for 10 years. Dad stood up slowly, his jaw set in that familiar stubborn line. That rabbit was a problem. It was an expensive distraction. I handled it. You handled it. Mom's voice rose to a near shout. You traumatized our son. You made him think love was conditional. You turned him into an accomplice in your cruelty. It was just a rabbit, Linda. Christ, you're acting like I killed someone. That was the wrong thing to say. Just a rabbit. Mom stepped closer to him, her fists clenched. It wasn't just a rabbit to him. It was his first real responsibility, his first experience with unconditional love, and you took it away from him and made him feel guilty about it for 10 years. I'd never seen my parents fight like this. Their arguments were usually quiet, tense conversations behind closed doors. This was raw and loud, and years of buried resentment finally exploding. You want to know why our son doesn't have close friends? Mom continued. Why he doesn't date anyone? Why he's moving 3 hours away for college? Because you taught him that loving something means it can be taken away as punishment. You taught him that his feelings don't matter. Dad looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of what he'd done, but it was gone quickly, replaced by defensive anger. I was trying to teach him about priorities, about being practical. That rabbit was his, Mom interrupted. He saved his own money. He took care of it responsibly. The only problem with that rabbit was that you couldn't control it the way you control everything else in this house. The fight continued for another hour. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. Accusations flew about. Other times Dad had been controlling, manipulative, emotionally distant. Mom brought up years of suppressed resentment about his rigid rules, his inability to show affection, his need to dominate every decision. I sat on the stairs, listening, feeling like I was watching the careful structure of our family collapse in real time. Part of me felt guilty for starting this, but a bigger part felt relief. Finally, the truth was out. Finally, someone else knew what had really happened. When the shouting stopped, the house fell into an eerie quiet. I heard Dad's heavy footsteps going upstairs, heard their bedroom door slam. Mom came to find me on the stairs, her face puffy from crying. crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you from that. I'm so sorry you carried this alone for so long." I hugged her back, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Really cry, the way I should have been allowed to cry when I was 8 years old and lost my best friend. "I thought he would leave," I told her through my tears. "I thought you'd be heartbroken and it would be my fault." "Oh, sweetheart." She held me tighter. "Nothing your father does is your fault. Nothing. He made his choices and they were wrong." That night, Dad slept in the guest room. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. He'd left a note saying he was staying at his brother's place for a few days, that we all needed time to cool down. Those were the strangest, most peaceful few days our house had seen in years. Mom and I talked constantly. She asked about school, about my plans for college, about whether I'd ever considered counseling to deal with what had happened. She apologized over and over for not seeing the signs, for not realizing how much the incident with Coco had affected me. "I should have known something was wrong," she said. "You changed so much after that. You became so careful, so afraid to want anything." She was right. I had become afraid to want things, afraid to get attached, afraid to trust that anything good in my life would be allowed to stay. When Dad came back home, things were different. The dynamic had shifted permanently. Mom was no longer willing to smooth over his harsh edges or make excuses for his behavior. She'd started standing up to him in ways I'd never seen before. "We're going to family counseling," she announced at dinner my second week back from staying at his brother's. "All of us." Dad immediately started objecting. "We don't need some stranger poking around in our business." "Yes, we do," Mom said firmly. "We need help learning how to communicate without manipulation and ultimatums. We need help rebuilding trust." It was the first time I'd ever heard Mom directly challenge Dad's authority. The first time she'd refused to back down when he got that stubborn set to his jaw. Family counseling was awkward and difficult. Dr. Brennan, our therapist, was a middle-aged man who specialized in family dynamics and childhood trauma. Dad attended the sessions reluctantly, spent most of them with his arms crossed, giving short answers to direct questions. But slowly things started to emerge. Stories about Dad's own childhood, where showing emotion was seen as weakness, where pets were considered luxuries his family couldn't afford. His father had been even more rigid and controlling, and Dad genuinely thought he was being generous by allowing me to have Coco at all. "I didn't realize how it would affect him," he said during one session, not looking at me. "I thought he'd forget about it and move on." 8-year-olds don't just forget about trauma, Dr. Brennan explained patiently. They internalize it. They build their understanding of relationships around it. It took months of sessions before Dad could admit that what he'd done was wrong. Not just impractical or harsh, but actually harmful. And even then, his apology felt more like he was going through the motions than genuinely understanding the impact of his actions. But Mom was changing dramatically. It was like the confrontation had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years. She started taking college classes in the evenings, something she'd wanted to do for years but Dad had always discouraged. She joined a book club and started going out with friends more often. She seemed lighter somehow, more like herself. The summer before I left for college, Mom surprised me with a conversation I never saw coming. "I've been thinking about what you said about wanting to be a veterinarian," she said one evening while we were weeding the garden together. I looked up, surprised. "I never said I wanted to be a veterinarian." "Not directly," she smiled. "But I see how you light up when you talk about work at the clinic. I see how gentle you are with the animals there. And I think maybe it's time you allowed yourself to want something again." She'd been researching veterinary programs, financial aid options, prerequisite courses I'd need to take. She'd even spoken to Dr. Martinez about what the path would look like. "It would mean changing your major," she said. "It would mean more years of school, more debt. But I think it would make you happy. And I think you deserve to be happy." The idea terrified me. Pursuing veterinary medicine would mean committing to something I cared deeply about, something that could be taken away or that I could fail at. It would mean allowing myself to hope for a future that looked different from the safe, cautious path I'd planned. But it also excited me in a way I hadn't felt since I was 8 years old, building obstacle courses for Coco in the backyard. I changed my major to pre-veterinary studies that fall. It was scary and difficult and everything I'd been avoiding for years. But for the first time since childhood, I was pursuing something because I wanted it, not because it was safe. College was a revelation. Being away from home, away from the constant tension and carefully managed emotions of my family, I started to discover who I was underneath all that protective armor I'd built. I made friends, real friends who I actually cared about and trusted. I dated a girl named Emma for almost 2 years. I joined the pre-vet club and volunteered at the campus animal shelter. Slowly, carefully, I started allowing myself to form attachments again. It wasn't easy. There were moments of panic when I'd catch myself caring too much about something or someone. Times when I'd want to run away rather than risk being hurt. But I pushed through it, partly because of counseling. I continued therapy through college, and partly because I'd finally understood that the alternative, living behind walls, never risking real connection, wasn't actually protecting me from pain. It was just ensuring I'd never experienced joy either. Emma was the first person outside my family I told about Coco. We were lying in her dorm room one night, talking about childhood pets, and the story just came out. She held me while I cried, angry on my behalf in a way that felt healing. "That's so fucked up," she said. "No wonder you're afraid of commitment. Your dad literally taught you that love comes with impossible conditions." She helped me see patterns in my behavior I hadn't recognized. The way I'd pull back whenever our relationship got more serious. The way I'd find excuses to end things rather than risk being left. The way I treated every relationship like it was temporary, just waiting for the other person to realize I wasn't worth keeping around. Junior year, I adopted a cat from the campus shelter. A small tabby named Miko who'd been returned twice by families who decided they didn't want him. He was skittish and defensive, clearly expecting to be abandoned again. Taking care of Miko was like healing a part of myself I'd I'd forgotten existed. The simple joy of having a creature who was happy to see me come home. The satisfaction of earning his trust slowly, watching him relax and start to believe he was safe. The way he'd curl up on my lap while I studied, purring so loudly it was hard to concentrate. Emma helped me see how significant this was. You're allowing yourself to love something again, she pointed out. You're risking the pain of loss because the love is worth it. She was right, and terrifying as it was, it felt like coming back to life. Veterinary school was everything I'd hoped and more challenging than I'd expected. The coursework was intense, the competition fierce, the emotional toll of dealing with sick and dying animals significant. But I'd found my calling. Every day I got to help reunite families with their beloved pets, just like Dr. Martinez had done back home. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve. Mom visited me often, proud of what I was accomplishing, supportive of my dreams. She'd started pursuing her own dreams too. She was working toward a degree in social work, wanting to help families in crisis. Dad and I had developed something that resembled a functional relationship, though it would never be truly close. He was proud of my academic success in his own distant way, but there was always that underlying tension, that knowledge of what he'd taken from me and how it had shaped me. The summer between my first and second year of vet school, I got a call that changed everything. Mom's voice was shaking when she told me, "There's been an accident. Dad had a heart attack at work. He's in the hospital." I drove home immediately, my mind racing. Despite everything, despite the complicated mess of our relationship, he was still my father. The thought of losing him before we'd ever really worked things out was devastating. He was unconscious when I arrived at the hospital. Mom had been there for hours, holding his hand, talking to doctors about treatment options and prognosis. He looked smaller somehow, lying in that hospital bed hooked up to machines. "The doctors say it was massive," Mom told me quietly. "He's stable for now, but they're not sure what kind of recovery to expect." We spent 3 days in that hospital waiting room. 3 days of wondering if he'd wake up, if there would be brain damage, if we'd ever get another chance to talk through the things that had been left unsaid. On the third day, he opened his eyes. The recovery was slow and difficult. Dad had to relearn basic functions, had to accept help with things he'd always done independently. The proud, controlling man I'd grown up with was suddenly vulnerable and dependent on others. But something about the near-death experience had changed him. Maybe it was the medication, or maybe facing mortality had given him perspective, but he was different, softer somehow, more willing to listen than to dominate conversations. One afternoon, while Mom was running errands and I was sitting with him in the rehabilitation center, he brought up Coco. "I've been thinking about that rabbit," he said quietly, not looking at me. My heart started racing. We'd never talked about it directly, not since that night when everything exploded. "I know I hurt you," he continued. "I know what I did was wrong. I didn't know how else to handle it. My father never would have let me have a pet at all. I thought I was being reasonable. It wasn't the apology I'd dreamed of as a child. It wasn't the full acknowledgement of the trauma he'd caused, but it was more than I'd ever expected from him. I know, Dad," I said. "I know you thought you were doing the right thing." "No," he shook his head weakly. "I knew it would hurt you. I thought you'd get over it faster than Linda would get over me leaving. I thought I was making the practical choice." There it was. The admission I'd been waiting 20 years to hear. He'd known it would hurt me. He'd chosen to hurt me because it seemed like the path of least resistance for him. "I was 8 years old," I said quietly. "I trusted you to protect me, not to use me." He was crying then, which was something I'd never seen before. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." We talked for a long time that day, about his childhood, about the impossible standards his father had set, about how he'd never learned to show love without control, about how he'd been jealous of the easy affection between Coco and me, how it had made him feel inadequate as a father. It didn't fix everything. It didn't undo 20 years of learning not to trust that love would be protected, but it was a start. Dad's recovery took almost a year. During that time, our family dynamic shifted again. Mom became the primary caretaker, the decision maker, the strong one. Dad had to learn to accept help, to be vulnerable, to trust others to take care of him. It was during this period that Mom made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to get a dog," she said one evening over dinner. "I've wanted one for years, and I think now is the right time." Dad's immediate reaction was to object. Dogs were expensive, messy, required too much attention, but then he caught himself, looked at me, and took a deep breath. "What kind of dog?" he asked instead. Mom lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "I was thinking maybe a golden retriever. They're good family dogs, gentle, good with grandchildren. We might someday have." That last comment made me smile. Mom was already planning for a future where I might have a family of my own, where our house might be filled with the laughter of children who would grow up with a dog who was never threatened, never used as a weapon, never taken away as punishment. They adopted Buddy. Yes, they named him after Jake's childhood dog. 3 months later, a 2-year-old golden retriever from a rescue organization, gentle and well-trained and immediately beloved by everyone who met him. Watching my parents with Buddy was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Dad, despite his initial reluctance, fell completely in love with that dog. He'd take him for long walks as part of his cardiac rehabilitation, taught him tricks, bought him toys and treats without being asked. "He's good company," Dad would say when anyone commented on how attached he'd become. "Helps with the recovery," but I could see it was more than that. Caring for Buddy was teaching Dad something about unconditional love, about the joy of having something depend on you not out of fear or obligation, but out of trust and affection. I graduated from veterinary school 2 years later. Mom and Dad both came to the ceremony, Buddy waiting in the car because Mom couldn't bear to leave him at home alone for such an important day. After the ceremony, while we were taking pictures, Dad pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," he said, "not just for graduating, but for becoming the kind of man who helps instead of hurts, for choosing to heal things instead of breaking them." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging the full scope of what had happened between us. us and how I'd chosen to respond to it. I opened my own practice 3 years later, specializing in small animal care. The day I signed the lease on my clinic, I hung a small photo in my office. It was a picture of 8-year-old me with Coco, both of us sitting in the backyard on a sunny afternoon. Mom had found it in an old photo album and had it framed for me. Every animal deserves to be loved unconditionally. I wrote on the back of the frame, every child deserves to have that love protected. My practice grew quickly. Word spread that I was especially good with scared animals, that I had a gentle way of handling pets who'd been through trauma. I developed a reputation for taking extra time with nervous animals, for never rushing examinations, for treating every pet like they were my own. Emma and I had broken up during vet school. The distance and stress had been too much for our relationship, but we'd remained friends. She visited the clinic during my first year in practice and was amazed by what I'd built. "You did it," she said, watching me gently examine a terrified rescue kitten. "You found a way to turn your trauma into healing." She was right, though it had taken me years to see it that way. Every scared animal I helped learn to trust again was healing something in that 8-year-old boy who'd been forced to betray his own pet. Every family I reunited with their beloved companion was proving that love didn't have to come with impossible conditions. I met Sarah during my second year in practice. She brought her elderly cat, Winston, in for what turned out to be his final visit. Winston was dying of kidney failure, and Sarah was heartbroken but trying to make the best decision for him. "He's been my best friend for 15 years. She cried while I explained his condition. "I can't imagine life without him." I spent 2 hours with her that day, helping her understand his condition, discussing quality of life, eventually helping her say goodbye to Winston with dignity and love. It was one of the hardest parts of my job, but also one of the most important. Sarah came back a week later, not with another pet, but to thank me. "You made the worst day of my life bearable," she said. "You treated Winston like he mattered, like his life had value." That meant everything to me. We started talking, then dating, then falling in love. Sarah was a teacher, patient and kind, and everything I'd never believed I deserved. She understood my protective instincts without being intimidated by them. She encouraged my emotional growth without pushing too hard. The first time I brought her home to meet my parents, Buddy immediately fell in love with her. He spent the entire visit glued to her side, showing off his tricks, bringing her his favorite toys. Mom was delighted. "Buddy's a good judge of character," she whispered to me, while Sarah was playing fetch with him in the backyard. "I think she's the one." Dad was more reserved, but I could see he approved. During dinner, Sarah asked him about his heart attack and recovery, listened attentively to his stories about cardiac rehabilitation, showed genuine interest in his experiences. By the end of the evening, even Dad was charmed. "She's good people," he told me later. "Don't mess it up." It was advice I probably didn't need. For the first time in my life, I was in a relationship where I wasn't constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, where I wasn't looking for reasons to run before I could be hurt. Sarah felt safe in a way I'd never experienced before. We were engaged 2 years later. The proposal wasn't elaborate, just the two of us and Miko, who was now a fat, spoiled house cat, in our apartment on a quiet Sunday morning. But it felt perfect because it was real, because it was built on trust and understanding rather than fear and desperation. Our wedding was small, held in my parents' backyard with Buddy serving as an unofficial ring bearer. Jake and his family came. He'd grown up to become a successful engineer, married his high school sweetheart, had 2 kids and a golden retriever of his own. It was good to reconnect with him, to realize that some friendships can survive years of distance and change. During the reception, Jake pulled me aside. "I always wondered what happened to Coco," he said. "I know you said he escaped, but I never really believed it. You were too good with animals to let something like that happen accidentally." I told him the truth, all of it. He listened without judgment, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "Jesus," he said when I finished, "no wonder you got so weird about pets after that. I thought you just lost interest, but you were actually traumatized." It felt good to finally tell someone else who'd known me during that time, someone who remembered how much I'd loved Coco and how drastically I'd changed afterward. "The fucked up thing is," Jake continued, "my parents would have taken Coco in a heartbeat if they'd known what was happening. My mom always felt bad about me not being able to have pets because of her allergies. She would have made an exception for Coco if it meant helping you." The thought hit me like a physical blow. There had been alternatives. Even as an 8-year-old, if I'd been brave enough to ask for help, if I'd trusted that adults other than my father might have solutions that didn't involve choosing between love and family, things could have been different. But I was 8, and I'd believed the adult who told me those were my only options. Sarah and I bought a house 2 years after our wedding. It came with a big backyard, perfect for the family we were planning to start someday. Our first addition to the household wasn't a baby, though. It was a rescue rabbit. Luna was a brown Holland Lop about the same size and color as Coco had been. She'd been surrendered to the shelter when her previous family moved and couldn't take her along. She was skittish at first, clearly not used to gentle handling, but she warmed up to us quickly. Having Luna was both healing and difficult. She reminded me constantly of Coco, of what I'd lost, of how much joy I'd missed out on during all those years when I was too afraid to love anything that could be taken away. But she also proved that I was capable of providing the kind of safe, stable love that every animal deserved. Sarah understood the significance of Luna without me having to explain it. She watched me build elaborate play areas for her, smiled when Luna would hop onto my lap during evening TV watching, never questioned the amount of money I spent on the best food and veterinary care. "She's lucky to have you," Sarah said one evening, watching me hand-feed Luna pieces of apple. "You're giving her everything Coco should have had." Sarah got pregnant when Luna was about a year old. Watching Sarah's belly grow, feeling the baby kick, planning for our child's arrival, I found myself thinking constantly about the kind of father I wanted to be, the kind of home I wanted to create. I thought about Dad, about the impossible choice he'd forced on me, about how it had shaped my entire understanding of love and security. I thought about the kind of unconditional love I'd experienced with Coco, Coco, and how that had been the foundation for my ability to eventually trust again. I made myself a promise. Our children would never have to choose between things they loved. They would never be taught that affection was conditional or that their feelings were inconvenient. They would grow up knowing that love, real love, protected rather than threatened. James was born on a sunny Tuesday in May. Holding him for the first time, looking at his tiny, perfect face, I felt a fierce protectiveness I'd never experienced before. This child would be safe. This child would be loved without conditions or ultimatums. This child would know that his home was a place where good things were protected, not taken away as punishment. Mom and Dad visited the day after James was born. Dad held his grandson with a gentleness I'd rarely seen from him, tears in his eyes as he studied James's tiny features. "He's perfect," Dad whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Over the following months, watching Dad with James was like seeing him discover a part of himself he'd never known existed. He was patient, gentle, delighted by every milestone. He'd spend hours just holding James, talking to him in a soft voice I'd never heard before. "Being a grandfather is different," he told me one day while we watched James sleep. "You get to love them without all the pressure of raising them right. You get to just enjoy them." I understood what he meant, but it also made me sad. He could have enjoyed me that way too if he'd chosen to. He could have delighted in my interests and encouraged my dreams instead of seeing them as problems to be managed. But I was learning that healing doesn't always look like getting the apology you deserve or having someone fully understand the harm they caused. Sometimes healing looks like breaking cycles, like choosing to do better with the next generation, like finding ways to honor what was lost while building something new. When James was 6 months old, we had a family portrait taken. The 5 of us, Sarah, me, James, Luna, and Miko, in our backyard, surrounded by the obstacle courses I'd built for Luna and the toys we'd started accumulating for James. Looking at that photo, I realized something I'd never expected. I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way I'd never thought possible. Not the careful, guarded contentment I'd learned to accept, but real joy. The kind of happiness that comes from feeling safe enough to love fully. Luna lived for 8 years, longer than most rabbits. When her time came, I was with her at the clinic, holding her gently as Dr. Peterson, my associate, helped her pass peacefully. Sarah was there too, crying as we said goodbye to the rabbit who taught me it was safe to love again. James was 7 when Luna died, old enough to understand loss but young enough to grieve openly. He cried for days, asked constant questions about where Luna had gone, worried about Miko getting old too. I answered all his questions honestly, held him when he cried, let him express his grief without trying to rush him through it. This was how it should be, I realized. This was how a child should be allowed to process loss, with support and understanding, not manipulation and ultimatums. We buried Luna in the backyard, under the oak tree where she'd love to dig holes. James helped me build a small memorial garden there, planting herbs and flowers that would bloom every spring. It was a way of honoring her memory while teaching James that love doesn't end with death, that the joy we shared with those we care about becomes part of who we are. A month after Luna's death, James approached me with a question that took my breath away. "Dad, can we get another rabbit? I miss having one to take care of." My first instinct was panic. The same fear that had kept me from forming attachments for years reared its head. What if something happened to this rabbit too? What if loving another pet just meant setting James up for more grief? But then I looked at my son, this brave, loving boy who was willing to risk heartbreak again because the joy of caring for something was worth the eventual pain of loss, and I realized he was teaching me something important. "Yes," I said, pulling him into a hug. "Yes, we can get another rabbit. Luna would want us to love another rabbit who needs a home." We adopted Clover 2 weeks later, a white and brown mini-lop who'd been found abandoned in a park. James was gentle with her from the first moment, clearly remembering everything I'd taught him about rabbit care during Luna's life. Watching James with Clover, I saw myself at 8 years old with Coco. The same wonder, the same immediate bond, the same natural gentleness that some children just have with animals. But there was a crucial difference. James knew his love would be protected. He knew the adults in his life would defend his right to care for the things that mattered to him. That security gave him a confidence I'd never had. He talked about Clover constantly, brought friends over to meet her, built elaborate houses for her out of cardboard boxes. He loved freely and openly because he'd never been taught that love was something that could be used against him. James is 10 now. He's grown up with animals as a constant part of his life. Clover, Miko, who's now ancient but still purring, the foster kittens Sarah and I sometimes take in through the shelter. He's learned to be gentle with scared animals, to respect their boundaries, to understand that love sometimes means making difficult decisions for their well-being. He wants to be a veterinarian when he grows up, just like his dad. Whether that dream will last or change doesn't matter to me. What matters is that he feels free to dream, free to love, free to care about things without fear that they'll be taken away as punishment. Last month, James asked me about my childhood pets. It was the question I'd been preparing for since he was born, the conversation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Did you have rabbits when you were little, Dad?" I took a deep breath and told him about Coco. Not the full story. He's not ready for that level of adult complexity yet, but the important parts. I had a rabbit I loved very much. His name was Coco, and he was brown like Luna was. Something happened that made us have to give him back to the pet store, and it made me very sad for a very long time. "That's why you're so good with rabbits," James said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of children. "Because you know how much they matter." Yes, I agreed. That's exactly why. Someday, when James is older, I'll tell him the full story. I'll explain how a father's inability to handle his own emotions led to a child being traumatized, and how that trauma shaped everything that came after. I'll tell him about the years of therapy, about learning to trust again, about choosing to break cycles rather than perpetuate them. But I'll also tell him about resilience, about how even the deepest wounds can become sources of wisdom and compassion, about how the very thing that broke me as a child eventually led me to a career helping other people's beloved pets, to a marriage built on trust and understanding, to a family where love is protected rather than threatened. Sarah is pregnant again. We're expecting a daughter in the spring. We've already started talking about names, planning the nursery, imagining how James will be as a big brother. Clover will probably be curious about the new baby, might even become protective of her the way rabbits sometimes do with children they trust. I think about this daughter often, about the world she'll grow up in, about the father I want to be to her. She'll have pets if she wants them. She'll be encouraged to form attachments, to care deeply, to trust that the adults in her life will protect the things that matter to her. She'll grow up hearing the story of her father's journey from a traumatized 8-year-old to a man who chose healing over bitterness, love over fear. She'll understand that families aren't perfect, that parents make mistakes, but that the best thing we can do is learn from those mistakes and do better for the next generation. Sometimes I wonder what became of Coco. He'd be long gone by now. Rabbits don't live 26 years, but I hope whoever adopted him from that pet store loved him well. I hope he lived in a home where his gentle nature was appreciated, where he was never used as a weapon or a bargaining chip, where he was simply allowed to be a beloved pet. I hope he was happy. Dad is in his 70s now, retired and spending his days doting on Buddy and visiting his grandchildren. The heart attack changed him in lasting ways. He's softer now, more willing to show affection, more aware of how precious time with loved ones really is. He and James have a wonderful relationship. Dad builds Lego cities with him, teaches him to use tools safely, takes him fishing on weekends. He's the grandfather I never could have imagined him becoming, patient, gentle, endlessly interested in whatever James wants to talk about. Sometimes I watch them together and feel a complex mix of emotions. Joy that James has this loving relationship with his grandfather, sadness for the father-son relationship I never got to have, and something like forgiveness for the man Dad was when I was young, flawed and controlling and doing his best with the limited emotional tools he'd inherited from his own difficult childhood. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the harm wasn't real or lasting, but it means choosing not to let that harm define the rest of my life. It means understanding that hurt people often hurt people, and that healing is possible for everyone willing to do the work. The clinic is thriving. We've expanded twice in the past 5 years, added 2 associate veterinarians, opened a separate facility for exotic pets. I still see a lot of rabbits, and each one reminds me of that 8-year-old boy who loved Coco so completely. Dr. Martinez, my old mentor, visits sometimes. She's retired now but still takes an interest in my work. Last year, she brought me a newspaper clipping about a new program at the veterinary school, a scholarship fund for students who've overcome childhood trauma and want to use their experiences to help animals and families. They need someone to chair the selection committee, she said with a knowing smile, someone who understands how trauma can become compassion. I accepted the position, reading the applications from young people who've survived abuse, neglect, or loss, and channeled those experiences into a desire to heal others, has been both heartbreaking and inspiring. Every year we fund several students who might not otherwise have the opportunity to pursue veterinary medicine. One of this year's recipients is a young woman whose family dog was killed by her stepfather as punishment for her standing up to him. Her essay about wanting to become a veterinarian to help other animals who've been hurt by the people who should protect them made me cry. She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to do amazing things. Trauma doesn't disqualify you from healing others. Sometimes it's exactly what qualifies you. This morning I woke up to James reading a book to Clover in his bedroom. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, and she was sprawled comfortably next to him, occasionally nudging his elbow when he paused too long between pages. "What are you reading to her?" I asked from the doorway. "A story about a brave rabbit who goes on adventures," James replied without looking up. Clover likes adventure stories. I watched them for a few more minutes. This boy and his rabbit, existing in that perfect bubble of mutual affection and trust. No conditions, no ultimatums, no fear that love could be weaponized. Just pure, simple connection between a child and his pet. This is what I was fighting for all those years ago, even when I didn't know it. This is what I was protecting when I chose to heal rather than repeat cycles of harm. This moment, this relationship, this security, this is love the way it should be. Tonight, after dinner, after James has finished his homework and Clover has been fed and Miko has claimed his spot on Sarah's lap, I'll sit in my home office looking at that old photo of 8-year-old me with Coco. I'll think about the journey from that broken child to this grateful man, about all the choices along the way that led to healing rather than harm, and I'll whisper what I've wanted to say for 26 years. Thank you, Coco. Thank you for teaching me what real love looks like. Thank you for showing me it was worth fighting for. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some trauma is too deep. Some cycles too entrenched. Some people too broken to find their way back to love. But some stories do have happy endings. Some people do choose healing. Some children do grow up to break the cycles that broke them. This is one of those stories. This is mine.